Welcome to a new Kirblog, all about franchise establishment versus reimagining on my life. Shut up, Kazoo, me. I didn't tell you you do the backing track. So I don't know how long this one is going to go for. I was inspired and was thinking about this particular subject, and then I remembered that I had a question tucked away about it, and figured while I'm kind of, I'm mulling this over on my head, I might as well just, in spur of the moment record this. So I don't know when this is going to come out. If this is before or after any of the recent topics that I've been releasing, but nonetheless. So this is this was a question submitted. I can't even remember how long ago, actually, or on what video, but I was thinking about this and pulled this question up. This is from Cyan Crimson Wind. Okay, I've got a good one for you. How do you feel about the massive series of reboots, sequels, and continuations that 90s and early 2000s series are getting lately? Astro Boy, Dragon Ball Super, Digimon Adventure Tri, the Yu-Gi-Oh movie on the way, just to name a few. Seems like these kind of productions are dominating the industry right now. That is true, and it's kind of interesting because this is actually something that I guess not talked about in depth, but often does come up in discussion as just kind of like, just offhandedly between myself and Steve Yurko, who of course has been on Kirblogs a few times before with Mike Lucas. It's interesting that in the last like several years, this has been a major thing that's happened, and actually I'll even say this to start with. As a subject separately from this in the future that I would really like to do, I want to do like a topic specifically about the feeling of nostalgia and like how valid that is in terms of like the quality of media. But that's a whole nother kind of subject in and of itself. So I'm gonna preface by saying I'm not gonna talk about that aspect of it too much. But that is something that I do want to get a little bit more in depth with a particular guest if I can get them as well. But yeah, so that aside. What's kind of interesting to me about this, and especially with the examples that you've suggested here for this topic, I think that there is, as the theme song also kind of implied, I think that there's a big difference between a reboot, reimagining, kind of popping up out of nowhere with that, and also a franchise already being established. And kind of the different areas, like the gray areas sort of in between and everything. As far as the specific examples that you mentioned, I'll even go into those to start with. So Dragon Ball, Digimon, and Yu-Gi-Oh, for instance. So with Dragon Ball, I mean, obviously I've talked extensively about Dragon Ball stuff on here for a long time. But Dragon Ball it's interesting, especially with its presence in the US, because so in Japan, Dragon Ball kind of like, was like in the background for a few years, and then it had a big resurgence with, new merchandise and video games in kind of the early 2000s when the first Budokai game came out. But for over here in the US, things just kind of kept continuing. And, like by the time that the show was ending on Cartoon Network, we jumped right into doing GT. We were still finishing up the original Dragon Ball. We were doing the video games every year, so like for us, the franchise never really necessarily went away. And now a lot of people today would say it made a big comeback in the form of the movies, or even in a way, I would even say with Dragon Ball Kai, because I think Dragon Ball Kai in particular, when that was airing on Nicktoons specifically, like its first time being in the US, it brought it back in a big way over here. In Japan, from what I understand, Dragon Ball Kai didn't really do like that massively well. It actually did a lot better overseas in general compared to Japan. But then also, of course, with the Battle of Gods movie, and then eventually Resurrection F, and then now of course Dragon Ball Super. Like a lot of people say that it's had like a big comeback. And I'm gonna come back to that. But then also, like for instance with Digimon Tri and the new Yu-Gi-Oh movie, I think kind of in tandem with Super. In a little bit of a different way, Digimon and Yu-Gi-Oh have continued to be, very, very much present. They've continued to put out new series, new video games, probably, I assume, new comics and merchandise and stuff. I don't know what specifically, but I would imagine that that's the case, for a lot of that stuff. And, but specifically, I'm assuming what you're talking about is, because Tri is a sequel to the original first Digimon series, and then the new Yu-Gi-Oh movie is continuation where the manga left off for the original Yu-Gi-Oh, and it's not, Digimon Tri is not related to Fusion, which is the most recent one in terms of a series, like a consistent series. And the same thing with Yu-Gi-Oh, it's not necessarily related to Arc 5, which is like the new series right now, which is kind of funny because like Bonds Beyond Time before that, which was very much a like, well, remember the old Yu-Gi-Oh series? Like, if anything, that was more of a Yu-Gi-Oh 5Ds movie, and 5Ds was the most recent one that was out, and it happened to have the GX and original Yu-Gi-Oh characters in it. But the point with all those things is like, these reboots are what I think in the negative sense is people seem to perceive them as like just trying to get a cheap. It's a cheap ploy at like preying on people's nostalgia for older stuff that they grew up with in the way that they remember it. I think I could even see people making the same kind of argument for Pokemon Go, where it's like, like it's specifically like catering to, or actually, you know what? Maybe even a better example than Pokemon Go would be Pokemon Origins, which I enjoyed, by the way. I did like it for what it was. I disagree with a lot of people a lot of people's notions about like, this is what the show should be. Like, I disagree with that. I don't think that it is a replacement for the show. It was very much its own separate thing, and it was cool and it was enjoyable and it was well made and I liked it. But I would also argue that in that specific case, especially because and if anything, it was kind of clever, I guess you could say, or maybe unclever depending on who you ask, but. Without spoiling it too hard in case you guys haven't seen it, there is something in the final installment of the 4 episodes of it that they did that is directly tied into Pokemon X and Y, which was the new game that was coming out at the time that Pokemon Origins was released. But yeah, that was specifically like, oh, remember the original Pokemon Red and Blue? Isn't that so cool? Etc. Like really selling people on that specifically. And that was kind of the response that I saw, as a result of it coming out. Pokemon Go, I think, in a way, is kind of in that same vein, and that at the very least, it's focusing specifically on the first 151 right now, which I think is a big reason why a lot of people that have fallen out of Pokemon are playing it. Which is funny because so many. I don't want to make this into a big Pokemon Go topic, but it's funny that people who are like bored with like the main Pokemon games and not really big into them anymore, which is, fair enough if they're not into it. But they even admit that Pokemon Go is like kind of a basic, like whatever stupid kind of game, but they still love it regardless of that. Now, I know whether that actually has to do with the fact that it's, it's preying on nostalgia in that way or whatever is up for debate too. But okay, so my point with I guess I'll have this, not trifecta, but the quartet of Dragon Ball, Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Pokemon. Big major franchises. These franchises are firmly established. They have been consistently here, like in the public eye in some way, for a very, very long time. Now, while the specific examples of the new movies and the new games and et cetera that focus on the first generation's worth of material that people in my age range or whatever are remembering, it's fair to assess that those are more or less being aimed specifically towards people that are because these are kids franchises. These are for kids products and toys and games and things like that. Typically, not to say that adults can't enjoy them, and of course, obviously they do. I know plenty of people in my own age range that still enjoy the current Dragon Ball, Digimon, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh stuff, right now, absolutely. But the fact that they're primarily aimed towards a younger audience, and these specific things that are like reboot, reimagining, subsects within these established franchises are aimed specifically towards that, that kind of that age range of people within that fandom. To answer the actual question of how do I feel about it, I think that for me personally, it is a case-by-case basis on if I personally get any kind of value out of those things. So, for instance, I'll go to each of those specific examples. Obviously, when it comes to Dragon Ball Super, you can listen to the Dragon Ball Super, Kirblogs that I've done specifically about those, if you want. With the Yu-Gi-Oh movie, I am interested because I would like to see, hey, this is being written. Actually, and actually, I'll even say this for both that and Dragon Ball Super as kind of an extension example. They're both like, hey, these are stories written by the original creator that are within the continuity, for what that's worth. Especially in the Dragon Ball's case, with what the original story was, and this is a further expansion of that material, with the original creator at the helm. That in and of itself, like, legitimizes it more to me in how it's like, oh, cool, I'm curious to hear what the original person that conceived this idea would come up with, even if it was urged on by the company that like owns the IP or whatever, and they're the creator that collects the paycheck and hasn't necessarily done anything in a while. Not to say that Toriyama and Kazuki Takahashi haven't still been producing work and doing stuff, but you know what I mean. And in terms of that specific IP, to see what they come up with, that is interesting to me. And so therefore I'm interested to go see those things. Whether they turn out good or not is a whole nother thing in and of itself. When it comes to Digimon Tri, for instance, like, I did watch Digimon Adventure, 1 and 2, both seasons of that, kind of sporadically on and off here and there. I talked a little bit about that with Ben on the Digimon Kirblog that we did together. And I enjoyed them okay, but I'm not, super interested in watching Tri because I don't have nearly the same level of attachment to those characters. And then in the case of Pokemon, like I mentioned, I enjoyed Pokemon Origins for just what it was. Like, it was a 4-episode fun little journey. It was well animated. It was well, executed and acted and written. And it was like, okay, that was fun. I enjoyed that. I don't, I'm not like salivating for, give me more of that. This is what I need. This is what will satiate my Pokemon specific desires. And, because I've been asked a couple times about this, I'm not playing Pokemon Go. Not because I think it's stupid or whatever. I actually think it's quite brilliant on their part. I don't want to make the time commitment, and I know that I'm going to play Sun and Moon, which is what I'm more interested in is the new main game, because in terms of the Pokemon game stuff, I'm excited about playing the next installment of the typical Pokemon games. And Go is just one that I'm like, I'm not interested enough to want to like make the time commitment for it. Even though I know it's not like a massive time commitment, but just I'm pretty picky with like what games I stop and make the time for in my later years. So going back to actually the first example you listed on here, Astro Boy. So Astro Boy, the last new thing that came from that specifically, of course, was the Studio Imagi animated movie, which I have not seen. For a similar case of what I was just talking about with some of the other examples, while I did watch the mid-2000s Astro Boy series on Kids WB, and I enjoyed it, I did not grow up with the original Astro Boy, and I, also was not hearing great things about the Astro Boy Imagi movie anyway. I still haven't seen it, so obviously I can't judge for myself, but I wasn't rushing out the door to go see it. Now, on that note, I'm going to use an example specifically here, and this is what I'm going to do. This is kind of the next part of the subject here that I want to bring up. I'm going to talk about Ghostbusters. Okay, so I have not seen the new Ghostbusters movie. I don't know if I'm going to see it. I'm recording this actually just before July is about to end. This is probably going to. This is going to come out in August. I don't know when yet, but either way, it's time travel, whatever. I don't know if I'm going to see the new Ghostbusters movie. So I believe at best I watched the first Ghostbusters movie as a kid, like probably syndicated on TV in passing. The only things I remember about Ghostbusters are like the actors that were in it. I couldn't even tell you the characters' names, which I know is pathetic. Slimer, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and I know the Zool motherfucker Zool joke because of Doug. Like that's it. So, while I know the original Ghostbusters is a fantastic, classic movie, I didn't grow up with it as a part of, my nostalgic childhood, whatever, So that's the reason why, even though I've heard like mixed things about the new Ghostbusters movies. I've heard from some, actually most of what I'm hearing now is, hey, it was actually pretty good. It was pretty funny. And I'm not surprised by that because, I know that the cast of it are all amazingly talented, really funny actresses. So I'm sure it's perfectly fine. I'm not rushing out the door to see it, not because of the fucking controversy or whatever. I have no opinion on that whatsoever. It's just, I'm not super interested in Ghostbusters as a franchise, and therefore I don't really care that much about going to see the movie. If I happen to see it, if maybe like I'm at a friend's house and they're playing it on Netflix if it's on there later, or they have the DVD or something, like, sure, I wouldn't be like, oh God, fuck this movie or whatever. I mean, I'm very rarely ever like that with movies in general. But in terms of like going out of the theater to see it, I'm not rushing out to go see that. Now, I don't know. I'm gonna say this. I don't know because I haven't seen the movie. I don't know if Ghostbusters, the new one, falls into this specific category. But this goes back to answering the actual question about how do I feel. In terms of how do I feel about those types of reboots, sequels, continuations, etc., is the fact, and actually, I'm even going to out myself as an example of this because I think that this technically applies. What the only main thing about those types of like reboots, reimaginings, whatever, within established franchises, or actually, you know what? I'll say specifically for franchises and IPs that have not had consistent establishment. So this is the difference between say the earlier ones of Pokemon, Dragon Ball, Digimon, Yu-Gi-Oh, which have consistently been in the public eye in some form, even if they're not massively popular like when they first came out, or if it's not just in general as popular as it could be or whatever, and it's specifically this thing that's catering to the older audience and the nostalgia of the whatever. The difference between that and what I'm talking about here is something that like Ghostbusters, which is Ghostbusters was something that was not around for a really long time, except for the case of the Ghostbusters 3 video game. Which I also don't know much about it. I don't know if that was well received or if people like that. I have no idea, so I can't speak on that. And again, I don't know if Ghostbusters necessarily falls into the category of what I'm talking about. But in general, when something that has been gone for a long time and it gets rebooted and it gets a new reimagined continuation, whether it's as a movie or a game or a comic or whatever, the part of it that is I guess frustrating to me is when I see it and I don't understand who it's for. Now, when I say that, and this is an inherent, I think, problem that most of these kind of things have. And sometimes this can even be the case with with stuff like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh and things like that. But it's again, it's a case by case basis. But so if it's something that's not been around for a long time, and whether it's they have the original people involved, like the original cast or the original crew or whatever, or if it's all new people working under the company that owns the IP and they want to put their new spin on it. The problem that often comes up is if they're using the name of something. I find that 9 times out of 10 there is, and sometimes it's in fact very often it's out of the hands of the creatives who are actually being set to make it. Usually it's people above them being like, okay, we want you to have it be, this much amount of in tribute or in line with how the original or previous incarnation of this thing is, so that if people who know the name of the brand or the IP or the whatever it is want to go see this new version of it and experience it, that they'll still be expecting something that is along the lines of, of what that name means to them, So, and now that's fair enough, but what I think the double-edged sword of that mentality is then that can be limiting to but now we can't go too far out of the scope of what, was the case of in the original or previous whatever of this whatever. That was a sentence. I hope you enjoyed it. Because the people above us or the consumers or how they perceive the consumers to react or whatever, we have to be wary of that. So therefore, we can't take as many liberties. We can't be probably as creative. And sometimes, granted, constraints can lead to more creativity. But I think in the case of reboots, it can sometimes do more harm than good. And not always. That's not a black and white blanket statement. Sorry. But it makes it like it makes the identity of this new incarnation of whatever. And again, I'm not even talking about Ghostbusters because again, I don't know if I haven't seen it, so I don't know if it falls under this umbrella necessarily. But there's other stuff that I've seen that does. Where like I don't want to use a specific example because I don't want to cause an issue. But okay, like when I see something that falls in line with that kind of description, right? And I check it out, and like say I did grow up with the original, and I'm like, oh, I'm curious to see what this new one is like, and I watch it, and I'm like, okay, this to me this comes off like it doesn't. Okay, you probably even know what I'm talking about. I don't even have to say what it is. And maybe you guys know what I'm talking about. If you do, then good for you. If not, whatever. Either way, I'm just gonna go with the example. So I'll watch a remake of something or a reboot of something or whatever, right? That I grew up with the previous version of. It's been gone for a long time, and this is the first like new thing that they're doing with it for a very long time, right? And I look at it and I'm like, I don't understand who this is for. I don't know if this is meant to be for me specifically, if this is like, oh, remember blah, blah, blah. Hey, it's back and it's like new and it's like, it's like today's modern hip type of sensibilities or whatever. I'm like, all right. But then at the same time, it's so like, that's not what that character would do, or that's like really like out of the scope of how they would act, or like that doesn't seem like it's along the same kind of like, sense of humor as the original, or doesn't have the same quality as the original, which, I mean, that's up to your, the individual's interpretation of what, good quality is or whatever, depending. But, like I see that and I'm just like, I mean, it's annoying, but it's also just confusing because I'm like, I don't know if this is more, it's trying to do both, presumably, or at least that's what it's coming off as. But the confusing part is, I don't know which side it's leaning more towards. It's like, is this for a new audience that didn't grow up with the original version of it or whatever, and you're trying to get people into it, based off of your own new interpretation of it, which that's fair to do that. That's completely fair. Because that's also like, say, for instance, one of my big kind of defenses about the Pokemon anime, for instance, I probably even talked about this in Pokecember like a fucking year ago, is I actually will even say, because recently there was a clip of an episode that I think just aired in Japan recently. It was a big fight scene between Ash and one of the rival characters from the X and Y series, and it's beautifully animated, and I saw that and I was like, that's really cool. I haven't been extensively keeping up with X and Y, but I know that show is very, very good. And a lot of people I see are like, wow, I didn't know Pokemon was so badass. What happened? And I'm like, Pokemon has been good for a very long time. You're just not watching it anymore because you're not into it. It doesn't appeal to you. You're not interested, and that's fine, but you're not being interested in it, and you grew up with however many seasons you watched until you were done and jumped ship or whatever. If anything, I actually say that I think that kids are very, very lucky and fortunate, not in like a privileged way, like in like a oh, that's really cool for them, good for them kind of way, of like that they have the show the way it is now. Because I often say like, oh, the Pokemon series is actually a lot more in depth now. There's a lot more like recurring characters in the show that develop and grow and that you like get to know over the course of like the years that like say like X and Y has been going on for I think like 3 years now, and like there's by the time they get to this end tournament where it's like all these characters that you've become attached to and know, and they all have like a battle together, and it's like, oh, it means something, as opposed to just like, hi, I'm Richie, you've known me for 5 seconds and now we're best butt buddies and we're just expecting you to like have this whole emotional experience or whatever. Like, wow, great, okay. Because that's kind of my criticism of some of the stuff that happened with the first season, which it's just, that's the first time they did that. So it's like, that was a lesson that was learned. And then they changed how they did that with each successive season. And, and now the show is, I think, at a level of quality that's higher than what it is that the people like me in my age range that grew up with the first season, have in comparison. But anyway, so... one of the other points, sorry, I almost forgot this. One of the other points that I often make kind of in tandem with that bit about the Pokemon series is that, I say, okay, like, oh, no, I remember. Okay, a lot of people were throwing a major shit fit about that episode, it was towards the end of Black and White, where Ash was using his Pokedex on a Charmander, and all it was, this is my little mini rant about this, I've never talked about this before, fucking everybody was like, oh my god, Ash is such a dumbass, he had a Charmander. I'm like, no, because all you saw, you fucking idiots, was the gift set on Tumblr from that episode that you didn't watch. And he was like, oh my god, like, why is he using a fucking Pokedex on Charmander? He's like, well, if you saw the episode and saw the fucking context of it, they were at a festival about, like about Kanto, and Ash was like, oh yeah, I know all this stuff, and etc. And he's talking to his friends from this region that, doesn't know as much about Kanto or whatever. He's telling them all these things. And that whole episode was about him reminiscing about his Charmander. And then and it was cool because actually that episode, you could even say it was like, oh, it was pandery or whatever to the season 1 fans or whatever. But no, it was cool. I really liked it, where it was all these like, reanimated scenes from, not just the first season, but all throughout, where Charizard was a prominent character in the show. And then ultimately ends up in Ash having Charizard come back onto the team, and he joins with him for, that little arc, the episode N arc or whatever it was called. But the thing is, a lot of people were like, oh, why would he use his Pokedex to explain anything about this Pokemon that he already knows about? I'm like, okay, you know about it because you grew up with Generation 1 and Season 1, and you know everything about Charmander and all those characters. Totally. The kids that are actually watching the fucking show, everybody, that wake up on Saturday morning and are excited about the new episodes and everything, that are actually watching the show, are not expected to have seen not only that season, but all, 700, however many episodes of the show that there are by this. There might even be like over into the 4 digits by this point. I don't even know. But that's what I mean, is like, actually another good example is that Mewtwo movie, the newer one where it was like Mewtwo versus Genesect. I saw that, and at first I was a little like, oh, like this isn't Mewtwo from the first movie. It's not consistent. It's like treated like a separate character, even though it's not a separate character. It's just Mewtwo. But then I stopped like, you know what? Okay, I can't expect that all the kids 15 years later who are seeing this movie to have also just so happened to have seen Mewtwo Strikes Back. So therefore, it's like, okay, well then clearly in this context, whoever the staff is probably, or I don't know, but very well could have been totally different staff than worked on Pokemon back then, and maybe even on that specific, the first movie all the way back then. We're like, okay, well, we're not expecting kids to know and have seen everything about the first Mewtwo movie and that version of Mewtwo from when we did that all the way back then. So hey, why don't we do a new interpretation of it, because we can go on the graces of knowing that most of the kids that are watching this don't have that information. So they did a new iteration of Mewtwo where actually, interestingly, they were voiced by a woman, which I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. My only complaint was that in one of the trailers, they were making it look like Ash recognized Mewtwo, in which case I thought, oh, is this the same Mewtwo from movie 1? Like, what's the deal? That was my only complaint. But as far as the movie itself goes, I don't blame them for choosing to go that route. Because it is like, this is its own thing. This is just a standalone experience. Is this movie, the Mewtwo versus Genesect movie, and it's like, that's fine, that's totally cool, and I enjoyed it for what it was, having seen and loved the first Mewtwo movie, which I've also talked about extensively on the Poke-Sember Kirblogs that I did back in the day. Anyway, going back to the point. Okay, so in contrast, like in that case, it's like, okay, no, I don't expect the kids to know everything about this. But when I see other examples where it's like, here's this reboot, but it's like half, we're not expecting the kids to have grown up with the original, so we're just using this legendary IP to do a new spin on it. And it's like, okay, sure, that's you have the right to do that, sure, but it's also inherently like we're reimagining this thing, and if you want to spin it in like a more naive or pure kind of way, but I mean, let's face it, it's not, because it's corporations and executives that make these decisions to bring these things back. More often than not, I find it's typically supposed to be about, hey, this is an IP that has characters that people love and that are really iconic, and we could tell like cool new stories with them, or we could reinvent old stories in a new way or whatever, and they want to bring that to to today's generation, or whatever you want to describe it as. But what's laced with that, with the fact that it is already a pre-existing IP, is the fact that there is already something like inherently built into that of like, okay, so maybe the people who have already seen this will be excited to experience it in a new way. And there is value in that, because very often, even though there are a lot of people that complain about those things, there are also a lot of people, I don't know if it's just as many or more, but there are people also in that equation that are genuinely open and interested into seeing, oh, how's this new? Okay, actually, great example. And this is a very specific kind of example. Power Rangers, the new movie. Okay, so I grew up with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, followed it extensively. Obviously, I did Parody Rangers, which was a big thing to show that I was obsessed with it, and it was a huge part of my childhood and everything. And, I've talked about this on the Power Rangers and Sentai Kirblog that I did or whatever, in that, I was watching, Zero Ranger and Mighty Morphin Power Ranger back and forth at the time with Liz. And, we stopped watching Mighty Morphin Power Rangers because we weren't really liking it. It was like, wow, this really doesn't hold up as well as we thought it did. And meanwhile, Zero Ranger, which, while obviously that wasn't a remake, that was the original in that case. That's where Power Rangers came from. We were experiencing that as like a whole new, and in our case, rather in our perception, a better, interpretation of this material that we were kind of semi-familiar with. Now, because of the fact that and again, this is kind of tying in with that whole like, the feeling of nostalgia thing. I'm glad about this is that I've learned about in my later years is that I found that I have a pretty solid ability to, for the most part, not have rose-tinted glasses at things that I grew up with and thinking that they are, they're completely, infallible or whatever. Like I can have the states in between of like, oh yeah, this still holds up. It's still got, some problems or whatever. It's not perfect or it could be a little stupid at times or whatever, but I still think it has a lot of genuine value to it. And also even as far as like, wow, that thing that I grew up with, like, yeah, like I can have that feeling of like, oh, haha, I remember this as a kid, but wow, it's really fucking bad now that I watch it again all these years later. And I can say why it's bad, and why something's good, etc. So on the note of the new Power Rangers movie, getting back to that, all I know is the cast, the couple pictures that they've released of the suits and the Rita Repulsa redesign, and the descriptions of basically the new personalities, or rather the updated personalities of the 5 Rangers, in how they fit in with, the plot, which is, the plot is more or less the same basic concept of the original show, where it's Zordon needs to get these teenagers to fight back against Rita Repulsa and blah, 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 etc., with Alpha 5, and they get discovered and they have to stop Rita. And I don't even know how different it's going to be. But here's the thing. With just the very basic information that I have, weirdly, I'm really excited to see this new movie. And and strangely, I've not been off-put by the new suit designs. I'm not off-put by the new design for Rita, even though it's completely different. And she might be a totally different kind of character for all I know. And I think that the reason in that specific case that I'm so open and excited to see this new version. Also, and the one other thing that I know that is making me kind of excited about it is the fact that it's people that worked on some of the really good X-Men movies. Kind of flashing back to fucking Marvel for a second. Yeah, so like, I think that the reason that I'm open and excited to it is the fact that I can look back on the source material and go, okay, this wasn't really all that good, or rather it turns out that it doesn't hold up very well. Like, at the time there was nothing else really like it on American television, and there was value to to what they were doing with it. Like even though it could be kind of preachy at times, like, the original Power Rangers, like it legitimately inspired a lot of people, to get into martial arts and to, try to be better people and to help others, etc. And that's good. Like for its entertainment value, I can look back and say like, wow, like maybe there's like scenes that still kind of hold up, or like, I know people still kind of enjoy the, the Green Ranger arc or whatever, but on the whole, like as just like a storytelling, like purely like just the media itself, it's not really that good. It doesn't really hold up that well, compared to other stuff from that same kind of era. That doesn't devalue it. That doesn't mean like, oh, like fuck it, whatever. Like it shouldn't, be treated with so much whatever. No, not at all. Like it is a huge franchise that is fully established. So if anything, actually, again, this new Power Rangers movie is kind of in the same line as the examples like with Dragon Ball Super, the new Yu-Gi-Oh movie, the new Pokemon Origins, and all that stuff. Where it's a consistently it's a franchise that has still been here for a long time, but in that case, it is completely, at least from the information that we have about it, it's making me excited that it doesn't seem like it's trying to be like the original source material that much, it seems like it's trying to be a better, more interesting version than it. Now, cases, and that first of all, that's completely like my perception of it, and that could completely change when the movie comes out. In which case, obviously, I'll be happy to eat my words if that's the case. But in that specific case, I think because I can look back and say, yeah, that wasn't that good. Oh, but this could be really good, and this could take the concept of it and do something a lot better with it than it was in its original form. That's exciting to me. I'm interested, so I'm going to go see this new movie. And again, tapered in with that, outlook is the fact that like it comes off to me like it comes off to me like so far that it's not trying to, it's not trying to necessarily, I don't know. It's hard to describe, but you know what? Okay, it comes off like it's more balanced in terms of both drawing new people in that have never experienced before, and also appealing to, at least in from my sensibilities, seeing, this new interpretation. Hey, this could be interesting. And again, that's a very, very rare example because, I can look at other cases where it's like, well, and actually, you know what? You could even make this argument for the Power Rangers movie, and something else that I'm going to use in a bit that regards myself is, well, if it's so different, then why bother having it be a remake in the first place? And obviously the answer to that is, we can catch the attention of people if we use this pre-existing name. Actually, you know what? Here, Skylanders. Everybody was so fucking aggravated about Skylanders having Spyro's Adventure as the subtitle for the first game in that series, which now became this massive franchise. But people were aggravated because this isn't a fucking Spyro game. It's like, no, it's not. Spyro is a character that happens to be in it who fucking cares. And Cinder as well from the later Spyro games. But it wasn't a Spyro game. It was its own separate thing, and they were just using Spyro. And the funny thing is, as far as I know, I don't think that Spyro being in the first game, I don't think anybody who was playing Skylanders gave a fuck, which again, in that case was the kids who were interested in it and buying the toys and collecting the toys and playing the game. And Spyro just happened to be a character in it that, for all we know, very likely wasn't a character that they recognized from the previous games that he originated from, because I think by the time that Skylanders came out, I don't even think there had been a Spyro game for at least a few years by that point. I think they stopped the kind of semi-reboot of that franchise with Elijah Wood as the voice of the character or whatever it was. I didn't follow Spyro extensively, so I have no idea. But yeah, in that case, it's it wasn't even because of that. It's who gives a shit? So if anything, that was kind of an almost, unnecessary. It seemed like it was an unnecessary, let's slap this character's name. Oh, nobody cares. People just like Skylanders for what it is, because it is not a Spyro game. It is its own thing that has now firmly established itself as a huge franchise. Now, I'm going to use myself as an example, and I'm going to out myself with this. So when I was first thinking about doing Tome at the time it was going to be as a game, because I wanted to do the original TDA as a game first. Again, that didn't happen. I learned Flash, and I was doing animation instead. That's a whole story that I've told a million times. But when I was thinking about just reviving that IP in the first place, and it had been 4 or 5 years, I think, since the original TTA had stopped, not ended, because I didn't end it, I stopped it, much to everybody's dismay. So when I was laying out, and again, without spoiling too much, I laid out most of the twists with that new version of what certain characters' secret identities were, and the twists with them and everything. I laid out the basic groundwork for most of the story ahead of time, in terms of how many episodes I was going to do and what was going to happen in each episode, which characters were going to show up during which. And I used the original TTA basically as a blueprint for going about doing it. Now, and as far as that roadmap goes, I guess not getting super spoilery, but whether you've seen the show or not, it's establishing the characters, fighting back against the hackers who were causing problems, the presence of the forbidden power virus thing, the tournament happening, the time leading up to the tournament itself happening, the big battle with certain key characters that came after that. And then what then became season 2 was a lot of new material, and also kind of a cross between what was the second and third season of the original TTA, kind of crossed together with a lot of new stuff. Now, I always went in terms of like writing and executing everything. I went into it completely like more or less as appealing to a whole new audience. There were specific moments, obviously, where I had little, throwbacks to the original TTA, but they were very, very minor kind of things in terms of like direct references. And the biggest thing was I actually tried to make a certain character look like they were going to end up going in the exact same path as they did as the original. And then it turned out, oh no, it wasn't. That was actually kind of to throw some people off who were thinking that because I've seen the original version, he's following the same blueprint and blah, 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 whatever. And then as it turned out, a lot of the paths of the character development and arcs and everything went completely differently, like day and night, mostly because of just how much, hopefully better I had gotten in all that time since I did the original version of it. But here's the point that I'm making against myself, is I didn't necessarily have to follow the general roadmap of the original TTA in terms of the story progression at all. I could have obviously had the same characters and continued to do my own new kind of, like what I perceived as not even necessarily reinterpretations, but really just better like updates of the characters. Like if anything, I saw most of them as just like, hey, these are like, upgrades. These are just me trying this again and doing it a lot better this time because now I have a lot more experience in storytelling and writing and animating and etc. But, that's how I perceived it specifically, that, it still is a reboot, reimagining, retelling kind of thing, I can't deny that is exactly what it is. But, that's a point that could totally be made against me. And if anything, it's also perfectly, easy to argue that it might have been a weakness of the story as a whole for me to follow that blueprint in the first place, because, that might have been me limiting myself. And I've thought about, if there were ever to be like a totally new interpretation of Tome, like from the ground up, not a continuation of the show as it is, but if it was something else, like, if it was, say, a game or otherwise, then in that case, I would really want to have it be like a whole new, like in terms of the plot progression, like not the same shit as it was in TTA and then Tome. Because then especially I feel like it's just, like you're just doing this again. And that's one of the things that's really difficult too, as I think about that. That's why like I don't always necessarily blame the people in the creative positions of having to make these reboots and reimaginings, because I know that finding that balance of, because of what people might be expecting, if anything, this could be a whole topic in and of itself. I would argue that's part of the reason why Sonic the Hedgehog games are so fucking all over the place, is because it's like, in fact, I think that's exactly what it is, where often it's like there's the struggle of, we want to do something new. Even Sonic Boom is a perfect fucking example of like, pardon me, is like, we want to do something completely new with this franchise and do like this kind of separate spin-off IP. But Sega's like, we want you to make it, still in line with and like recognizable to the source material, and it also has to have like certain elements of the gameplay that people would come to expect from a Sonic game. And it's like, okay, well, and then there's also the added, thing of like, we're not really that experienced in making that type of game, a speed game, and that's really difficult. And look at how long it took for the people that created Sonic originally to get that down. I would argue it wasn't even necessarily until like Colors or Generations, but again, that's a whole other topic. I don't want to get into that. But it's the same kind of like struggle. It's the same like, being pulled, by different, people on both arms from different sides. Like, I don't know what to give you. I don't know what to give you. Shit, it's difficult to kind of strike that balance and find something that works. Now the kind of like go-to easy answer for this is, making something completely new from the ground up that is inspired by, this thing or whatever. Now, as a creator, I like that more when that's the case. And actually, I think this is a little bit off topic, but I think this is still a point worth making. I think that when going back to the bit about, like an established franchise. Actually, I'll use Pokemon as an example. When I see people who are bored with Pokemon, and like they're not really excited about, oh, like Sun and Moon, whatever, it's just the same game. It's like, that's fair. That's perfectly fair. Yes, it is very often the same, layout of you fight the HM leaders, you fight whatever the evil team is, you fight the Elite Four, and then you just have fun and do all the side quests and you can play against your friends and etc. Yeah, it's the same layout every time. Same thing with a lot of established franchises. And, obviously with each new installment, they do attempt to add in new elements and new gameplay types and new interesting things that they can kind of do. And, that can also be a recipe for greater success, or sometimes a recipe for making people upset that it's not like what they were expecting and it's like, not as good or whatever. Again, that's a different subject. But my point is, I think that when people get to a point of where they're sick of, not like, oh, it's not as good as it used to be. It's, I'm sick of this. Like, oh, I don't want to play this anymore. I think it's because, or when they, in fact, even the opposite of, oh, it's not as good as it used to be. It's, I wish that they would do something totally different with this IP, with this series, with this whatever. Like, I've actually, Mike Lucas has brought up, like, I think it would be cool if Pokemon did like a totally different battle system. And I'm like, they're never going to do that. They're never going to do that for the main series games. For a spinoff, absolutely. Pokken was, I think what a lot of people probably wanted Pokemon Stadium to be when it was first announced. They wanted it to be, if not an RPG, like a 3D console RPG Pokemon game. I think a lot of people wanted it to be a game where you control your Pokemon in 3D space and run around and you can do different moves and shit. And Pokken is the closest thing, I think, to that as a game. But as far as the main games go, it's like, no, of course they're not going to, stop it from, they're not going to change it from the core gameplay mechanics of it's a turn-based RPG where you can collect and build whatever team you want with whatever moves you want that they can have, etc. Because that's what a Pokemon game is, like at its core. That's what the mainline series of Pokemon games are. But sorry, I keep getting kind of off topic from this off-topic subject. Is I think that when people get to a point where it's like, I'm done, I unless they do something totally different, pardon me, then I'm done with this franchise. That's perfectly fine. But I think what the answer to that is just you've grown out of it and your values have changed and you want something different. I think that like in the case of a video game specifically, because I think that comes down to like the genre, and that video games, it comes down to what is the enjoyment factor of the game? Is it the gameplay itself? Is it the world? Is it the characters? Is it the story? Is it, if it is the gameplay, is it, what is it about the gameplay? Is it the exploration? Is it the winning? Is the victory you get if it's like a fighting game or something? Is it, the strategic aspect that invigorates you? Pardon me, disgusting, gross. I'm getting tired, as you can tell, and making gross noises. Anyway. The enjoyment factor, like if that's changed and like the enjoyment factor of a long running franchise is no longer giving off the same spark as it used to, then the answer is you're bored and you want something different, in which case, okay, well then find another turn-based RPG game or fighting game or whatever that is different and new and has something to it that, that the series that you were invested into before and now are sick of can maybe offer you. That might be something that would be interesting to you. Give that a shot, But I think that it's easy for people to just like gravitate, even if they're sick of it or whatever. Sonic again is a great example of this. Like they gravitate back, and it's like, oh, like again, like this bit about like the two new Sonic games actually, where it's like Sonic Mania is, this is perfect. Sonic Mania is, you could argue, oh, that's preying on the nostalgia of Genesis fans. Oh, here's just another fucking Genesis like game, developed by like fans or whatever. But it's like, but there are people who are like that. Who gives a shit? I'm fucking excited. I want to play that game. It looks like it's gonna be awesome. Oh, and it's by people that I trust to make a really fun, fucking awesome 2D Sonic game. Cool, And then with the 2017 project, if at the very bare minimum, with the little that we know about it, if it's another Colors or Generation style really fast kind of game like that. That's cool. And that's like, okay, that's what we've come to expect now, is like, this is what a good 3D Sonic game, as, by and large, the opinions are of people, I think and hope to God. Please, we don't need Sonic Adventure 3, guys. Sorry. But that's like, okay, cool. Well, then we know what to expect. We know what we want. or we know that's going to be something that will be of quality and that will be enjoyable. Hopefully. Again, Sonic is a difficult kind of example to use, but I think it still kind of applies more or less. So yeah. So to end this with just again answering the question as black and white as I can. I am how I feel towards reboots, reimaginings, stuff like this in this era that we're in. Again, the nostalgia side of it is something like the actual nostalgia feeling is something that I want to delve into in a separate topic, discussion, whatever, later. But my feelings towards those kind of things are not entirely negative. They are typically really only negative when they come off to me as they don't know what they want to be, they don't know which side they're catering to more, that they're unbalanced in terms of the new generation and the old nostalgic generation of whatever it is a reboot, reimagining, revival of. But otherwise, I am while I am open to and can be in certain cases excited about the prospect of one of those kinds of things. What I prefer is, to see something like, oh, cool, this is like a spiritual successor or a reimagining in terms of it's a new IP that is very much inspired by blank that, has been either gone or dead or whatever. I mean, hell, okay, actually, this is a great example too. I love Dragon Ball, right? But One Piece is totally inspired by Dragon Ball in a lot of like very core concept kind of ways. And I can object, even though I'm a bigger Dragon Ball fan than I am a One Piece fan, I can look at One Piece objectively and say One Piece is better than Dragon Ball, like on the whole. Like preparation age. Good job, Chris. Going for 50 minutes. I'm getting really hazy here. Help me out. Stay with me. Yeah, like One Piece is, and lots of other Shonen Jump series, and probably beyond that too, very much inspired by Dragon Ball Z. And One Piece, I think, is better, like, overall than Dragon Ball, like, the franchise. And they're running at the same time. They're both established franchises that are here at the same time. Like, Dragon Ball isn't dead in the water. One Piece is and Dragon Ball are both like side by. I mean, for fuck's sake, they've crossed over. But yeah, my point is typically if it's something like, oh, this is new, and it's I can tell this is inspired by this other thing. Whether I have experienced that other thing before or not. I think just like new and original ideas are what are more exciting. And you know what? I think the other thing is even if they don't do as well, if they're not always as successful, because it can be difficult to get something new off the ground, especially when it comes to the internet, but even in just like, the mainstream media in general, it is difficult to get people to give a shit about a completely new IP. But I think that even if people don't know it or they don't know how to describe it or they're not like fully aware of it, I think that people are more enthusiastic about a new thing that is in the vein of something that they've already liked and experienced and grew up with, and that is better. I think that and there are exceptions, obviously. I think that there are people, that are, just hate everything new, and, just only are blinded by nostalgia. Thankfully, those people are pretty rare by and large, but yeah, I think those things are exciting to people in general, and that, that is what leads to like, oh, this is the thing that I'm into now. Like, oh, this is totally like this great amalgamation and like, or like an amalgamation of different things in different ways executed together in one like really cool new kind of package with a new coat of paint on it, or like something that's like a subversion. I mean, I'm watching One Punch Man. I'm only a couple episodes into One Punch Man at the time that I'm recording this, but I think that the big reason why people like that so much, like I can tell, is because it's very like it's subverting a lot of tropes in typical anime and manga. Same thing like with Kill la Kill, I think was very subversive in that kind of way. Stuff like that, and like, yeah. So I don't know. I think that that's the case, and just not everybody always like necessarily knows that or is aware of that or can describe that, but like that's something that's kind of like underlying with what they seek in media. There's that good point about like in that game theory about gamers don't know what they want, and I think that is true as well. I think that because it's hard for people to like grasp and describe, and they're not required to describe that necessarily. And I think that because of that, I think that it's so easy to just be like, oh, well, if we go with something safe that already exists, that they might have some level of familiarization with, and that's fine. That works. Whatever. We'll just go with a new thing of that, whether it's something that's already been consistently established for a long time, or if it's something that hasn't been around for a long time and they feel, oh, but we think the new generation, if we just do some tweaks to it, and hopefully do it right, because we, aim to do that. And I don't think anybody ever aims to make a purposefully shitty reboot of something, really, as far as I know. I hope to God not. Then we can introduce this to a whole new audience, and hopefully even get people who grew up with the original to enjoy it as well. That's always what the goal is, and it depends on the final product to get the results that they are looking for. So yeah, that was an hour of my thoughts and how I feel about those things. I hope that was somewhat interesting and at all for going on for a fucking hour. I just hit the button and was waiting to see how this went. But yeah. So that's it. But thanks for listening. I hope that this is somewhat interesting and enjoyable at all. But I guess in the comments below, what do you think? If you want to give specific examples that, unlike ones that I avoided trying to use, please go for it. Let me know your thoughts about this same kind of subject. I'm curious. I mean, you know what the topic is by the description and the hour that I've just spent describing it to you. So let me know what you think. Tell me some stories. Give me maybe some other examples that I didn't mention or implied or whatever. And yeah, that's it. And if you have future Kirblog topic suggestions related to this or otherwise, maybe as an extension of this topic, leave a comment about that too. I don't know when I'll be doing the kind of sequel to this one about nostalgia. I'll see what happens with that. But looking forward to that, because I definitely want to do that at some point. And that's about it. So yeah, thanks, and I'll catch you all later. Have a lovely weekend, whenever this one comes out. I don't know, but have a good whatever that is. Bye.